Hello, this is Dave. Today I want to talk about what I consider to be the biggest lie of all. It's a subject I've been looking at for the last 6 months, and I've been pretty hesitant to talk about it because, it's a really controversial subject. Now, I stumbled across this completely by accident. I was researching something on a totally unrelated topic and happened to see an intriguing sounding video. So I clicked on it, but the subject was so preposterous that I was just about to turn it off when it happened to say something that piqued my interest. So I watched the video completely to the end. And by the end of it, I had questions. I had some serious questions. So I'm going to ask you to be open-minded about this. This is very, very controversial and difficult to get your head round. So just bear with this and keep an open mind. So, in order to determine the truth, I'm going to be using a few principles here. The first of which is the scientific method, something that the scientific community doesn't seem to use these days. But the scientific method is where a theory or opinion is put forward that matches what we observe. But if something comes along that contradicts those observations, then the theory must be discarded. The second principle is Occam's razor. That's quite simply, the simplest explanation tends to be the truth. The third principle I'm going to be using is from Sherlock Holmes. When the impossible has been eliminated, whatever is left, however improbable, must be the truth. I'm also going to have to accept a couple of things. The first of which is what I call the ant's perspective. If you imagine an ant walking across a runway and all of a sudden a jumbo jet lands next to it, the ant's probably going to say, "What the hell was that?" But there is no way that the ant can ever figure out what just happened to it. It's just beyond the ant's ability to comprehend. So we have to accept that there may be things that are way beyond the human mind's ability to comprehend. The other thing we have to accept is how easily our minds, once they've been programmed or given a world view, how easily those minds can be fooled. You started watching that video with a certain world view. After all, you know what a room looks like. But those preconceptions caused you to ignore some of the subtle cues that would have given the game away, such as the black rectangle underneath the chair, or the difference in colour between the cups, or even the strange angles of the picture on the wall. You believed a visual lie because your world view was so powerful that it blinded you to any evidence that contradicted it. The other thing I'd like to mention at this point is how easily we can be fooled by two-dimensional imagery. We've been trained and conditioned to suspend disbelief when we see certain two-dimensional imagery, such as photographs. A photograph is not reality. It's a photograph. And photographs can be altered and manipulated. Video is not reality. And here's some examples of that. pretty realistic stuff. Point is, you can't automatically trust any two-dimensional imagery or media that's presented to you by the establishment. So let's get down to it then, shall we? This is apparently the truth of our world. We live on a spherical planet called Earth, spinning at 1,000 miles an hour on a 23.4 degree tilt. Now, I always thought it was 23.5 degrees, but as I researched into this, I found it was actually 23.4. That's 23.4 degrees away from vertical. Funnily enough, that leaves 66.6 degrees away from the horizontal. Interesting. So anyway, we're orbiting an ordinary star that is apparently 93 million miles away. The Sun itself is embedded in a galaxy of 100 billion stars, and that galaxy is one of trillions and trillions in an infinite and expanding void. And in the midst of that void, we are just an insignificant and unimportant microbe that arrived here by accident, that's crawling around on this speck of dust. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh dear, he's turned into one of those flat earther people. But if you've ever discovered the truth behind all those things that have been labelled as conspiracy theories, you've been willing to set aside your preconceptions of the world to be able to accept a new and often terrifying version. This is no different, so please bear with me. The first thing that people will automatically say is, of course we live on a spherical Earth. We've got the photographic evidence, don't we? Well, strangely enough, when you try and search for a picture of Earth from space, you'll find surprisingly few of them. In fact, all of them, including this one, this is from NASA, it's called the Big Blue Marble. All of them are composites. NASA will freely admit to them being composite images or CGI or Photoshop. There's only one image that NASA will claim was shot from space, and it's this one. It's apparently shot from Apollo 17. But all of these images have problems. First of all, the scientist will tell you that because the Earth is spinning, centrifugal forces will force the equator to bulge out as it's spinning. So the Earth is more of an oblate spheroid. But, funnily enough, all the images from space, supposedly, are perfect spheres. Also, one thing I noticed is that the colours of continents and the sea itself, they're very vivid. Now, when you look at anything at a distance, maybe if you look at some hills at the distance of 3 or 4 miles, you'll see that the colours are kind of washed out somewhat because of the atmosphere. If you see mountains further off in the distance, the dark colours are washed out even more because of the influence of the atmosphere. So how can it be that you get these very vivid, striking colours through miles of atmosphere? I can't explain it. The other strange thing about this supposed shot of Earth from space is that the continents actually appear to match the Mercator map rather than the Peters projection map. Now, if you don't know the difference, here's a little video to explain it.
Should we begin?
Yes. Plain and simple, we'd like President Bartlett to aggressively support legislation that would make it mandatory for every public school in America to teach geography using the Peters projection map instead of the traditional Mercator.
Give me $200 and it's done.
Really? No. Why are we changing maps?
Because, CJ, the Mercator projection has fostered European imperialist attitudes for centuries and created an ethnic bias against the Third World.
Really?
The German cartographer, Mercator, originally designed this map in 1569 as a navigational tool for European sailors.
The map enlarges areas at the poles to create straight lines of constant bearing or geographic direction.
So it makes it easier to cross an ocean.
But
Yes.
it distorts the relative size of nations and continents.
Are you saying the map is wrong?
Oh dear, yes. Look at Greenland.
Okay.
Now look at Africa.
Okay.
The two land masses appear to be roughly the same size.
Yes.
Would it blow your mind if I told you that Africa is in reality 14 times larger?
Yes?
Here we have Europe, drawn considerably larger than South America. When it's 6.9 million square miles, South America is almost double the size of Europe's 3.8 million.
Alaska appears 3 times as large as Mexico, when Mexico is larger by 0.1 million square miles.
Germany appears in the middle of the map when it's in the northernmost quarter of the Earth.
Wait. Relative size is one thing, but you're telling me that Germany isn't where we think it is?
Nothing's where you think it is.
Where is it?
I'm glad you asked. The Peters projection.
It has fidelity of axis.
Fidelity of position.
East-west lines are parallel and intersect north-south axes at right angles.
What the hell is that?
It's where you've been living this whole time. Should we continue?
Uh-huh.
So, you're probably wondering what all of this has to do with social equality.
No, I'm wondering where France really is.
Guys, we want to thank you very much for coming in.
Hang on, we're gonna finish this.
Okay.
What do maps have to do with social equality, you ask?
She asked.
Salvatore Natoli of the National Council for Social Studies argues, in our society, we unconsciously equate size with importance and even power.
I'm going to check in on Toby.
Go.
These guys find Brigadoon on that map. You'll call me, right?
Probably not.
Okay.
When third world countries are misrepresented, they're likely to be valued less. When Mercator maps exaggerate the importance of Western civilization, when the top of the map is given to the Northern Hemisphere and the bottom is given to the Southern, then people will tend to adopt top and bottom attitudes.
But wait, where else could you put the Northern Hemisphere but on the top?
On the bottom.
How?
Like this.
Yeah, but you can't do that.
Why not?
Because it's freaking me out.
So the Mercator map was designed as a navigational aid, but the Peters projection map is a more accurate rendering of what the continents look like. So why then do all the images of Earth from space show the Mercator map? I guess that's because that's what we're used to. Even the one image that is claimed to be an actual photograph of Earth from space is called into question, simply because of a film that was released accidentally by NASA of Apollo 11 faking the very first picture of Earth from space. So let's have a look at that video.
An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr. and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour in living color, with exceptionally clear behind-the-scenes audio of conversations discussing the techniques used to achieve a disingenuous picture depicting the Earth at a distance, in order to falsely demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. It cannot be misconstrued that this staging was done for some other reason, for the reel itself is slated and dated July 18th, 19th and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission when they were said to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private. Until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get to playback, we can sort of correlate what we're so much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows, as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through a the number 1 window, and there isn't any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from any other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue gas. See white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth. And
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up to see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July, and then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey?
And you can see the full sequence on a documentary called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. That's one that I highly recommend you have a look at. But as for photographic evidence of a globe Earth, nope, it doesn't exist. Now let's take a look at Earth's supposed curvature. Many people point to Felix Baumgartner's recent record-breaking freefall jump and point to this picture in particular. It clearly shows a curvature of the Earth, but let's take a closer look at it. Well, it's quite obvious that a fisheye lens is used here. If you look at the shape of the capsule itself, those are usually built with fairly straight lines, and you can see the lines are very curved on the edge of this capsule. He took off from New Mexico, and the surface of the Earth looks like, well, it's one big large landmass, and that's New Mexico. I didn't realise that New Mexico took up so much of the Earth. It's clearly a fisheye lens. We know intuitively, if we stand on a beach with a panoramic view, that the sea is flat. It's flat at sea level, it's flat from the top of Mount Everest, it's flat from over 20 miles high. I got this image from another YouTuber. I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the one who goes, "Where is the curvature? Where? But it's a picture of the New York City skyline from over 40 miles away. He says it's 60 miles away, but I measured it on Google Earth. It's 40 miles away. The reason I added this one is because I used to live halfway between Bear Mountain and New York City, and from North Route 17, I was clearly able to see the New York City skyline from about 20 miles away. From 40 miles away, the New York City skyline should have been about 1,000 feet below the horizon. And that neatly leads me into the horizon problem. No matter where you are above the surface of the Earth, the horizon always rises to your eye level. Doesn't matter if you're standing on a beach, or up a hill, or in a plane at 35,000 feet. The horizon is always at eye level. Well, that would be impossible on a spherical Earth, because the Earth would curve away from you, and so it would always appear below you. As on this diagram, the expected horizon would be below you, but that's not what you see. When you look out of a plane window, you always see the horizon at eye level. And it doesn't matter how big you make the Earth below the plane, the horizon would always appear below you. In 240 BC, a Jesuit named Eratosthenes, my apologies to any ancient Greeks among you, he calculated the Earth's circumference. He did that by planting a stick in the ground at midday so that the sunlight, being directly overhead, would cast no shadow. Simultaneously, about 400 miles away, 93 million miles away, as I show in this diagram. Well, actually, I can't really show 93 million miles to scale here, because if it was, the Earth would be probably in the next town. Point is that at that kind of distance, all the light rays from the sun would be parallel near enough. And, if you recall, Eratosthenes' calculation of the circumference of the Earth actually depends on the light being parallel from the sun. So, when the light shines through broken cloud, it would hit the ground parallel rather than at this kind of angle. So if you're able to measure the angle of these sun rays, you can basically, with a bit of simple geometry, figure out exactly how high the sun is. And that turns out to be about 3,100 miles. And if you were going to try and hide this information, that the sun is actually very close, perhaps you'd encode it in symbol. Does this look familiar? There are quite a few videos like this one where people send up their video cameras on weather balloons. One thing to note is where you can see a hot spot on the clouds directly under the sun, like here. You see it? Directly under the sun is a hot spot. Now, that would be impossible if the sun was 93 million miles away. But also note how the sun appears to move with the Earth. As the camera rocks about, you'll see the sun moving around with the Earth. Now again, if the sun was 93 million miles away, you wouldn't see that. Just like if you were on a speeding train, the trees next to the track will whiz past you, but the mountains in the distance would, well, they'd hardly move. And if the sun was behind those mountains, the sun wouldn't move at all. So just like in this diagram, you can see there's a sun a long, long way off and a sun that's directly above the kind of landscape. And as the camera is simulated to move here, you can see that the closer sun is moving with the simulated Earth here. But the one further away moves as if it was further away. You can see it hardly moves in relation to the Earth. Again, that's not what we see in these videos. The sun appears to be directly above the flat Earth. In the flat Earth model, the sun rotates around us and only appears to rise and set because of the way our vision works. We see in perspective. That is, the horizon is at our eye level, and as things recede from us, they tend to converge to the centre of that horizon line, to a place that's known as the vanishing point. Just as if you were standing at the end of a very long corridor, you would see that the walls would appear to converge. The floor would appear to rise up to meet the horizon, and the ceiling would also appear to move downwards. Of course, the walls and the ceiling are all parallel to each other, so they don't actually move anywhere, but it would just appear that way. And anything that lies beyond the vanishing point is effectively invisible to us. It's beyond the limit of our vision. The clouds in this picture are all at the same height, but the further they are away from you, the lower down in the sky they appear to be. And similarly, the further away the cloud shadows are on the ground, the higher up they appear to be. Now, try and watch the following video without the preconception that the sun rises and sets, but rather moves closer to you and then moves further away. I'm afraid I can no longer take the idea that the sun is 93 million miles away very seriously at all. So now let's turn our attention to the moon. Many of us have seen the moon appear full at various times throughout the day, as in this picture. But how can that happen? If you're standing at point C, then it's the middle of the night. Full moon, no problem. And if you're standing at point A, it's early in the morning. Certainly if you stare back at the moon in the night sky, then yes, you can see a full moon. But if you're standing at point B, which is midday, that is, the sun is directly overhead, then there isn't anywhere that the moon can be that will allow you to see it as full. Because the sun will be illuminating the side of the moon that is facing away from you. So the best you'll be able to see is a sliver of the moon. Think about it next time you see the full moon during the day. Every month the moon goes through 8 distinct phases. Always the same 8, always the same order. Supposedly because of a relationship between the position of the moon relative to the position of the earth and the sun. So let's say it's December, and throughout the month we see the normal 8 phases of the moon. But what happens when it's June and the earth is supposedly on the other side of the sun? Shouldn't the phases be reversed? That's not what we see. We see the same 8 phases in the same order. We are told that the moon is also spherical, but when we look at the moon, it seems to be lit uniformly over its entire surface. But if it was a sphere reflecting the sun, then that curved surface would display a highlight, and then that light would drop off as it went round the surface. But that's not what we see. The entire moon is lit uniformly. The quality of the light from the moon is completely different from the sun's light. The sun's light is hot, and it's shifted towards the yellow part of the spectrum, whereas the light from the moon is cold and more silvery. Heat is essentially infrared light. So in order for the moon to absorb the heat from the sun and not reflect it, it would have to be a deep green colour to absorb the infrared. So unless the moon is made out of green cheese, it is not reflecting the sun's light. It appears that the moon is not a sphere and it's not reflecting the sun. It is self-luminous. Also, we should be able to see a slightly different view of the moon depending on where on the globe Earth we happen to be. But this is not what we see. It doesn't matter where we are on Earth, we always seem to see the same view of the moon. Now, my friend Nolan pointed out that this is obviously a very exaggerated picture. The moon is supposedly 30 Earth diameters away from the Earth itself. But even so, that difference in position should give you a slight difference from point A to point B. But again, that's not what we see. So apparently the moon is 238,000 miles away. But if you just put that aside for a second and just look at the moon, perhaps you'll notice this. In this example, only the clouds close to the moon are lit up, not the clouds further away. That indicates that the moon is much, much closer than we've been told. Because if the moon were 238,000 miles away, then all the clouds should be illuminated, not just the ones closest to it. And here's an example of a schoolboy mistake. This is a famous picture from Apollo 8, which is entitled Earthrise. It was taken from above the moon's surface, looking back at the Earth. The only problem is, the Earth appears the same size as the moon appears from the Earth. But the Earth is 4 times the size of the moon. So it should have looked like this. Somebody screwed up. Now, there will be some people who still think we went to the moon. I can't believe that there are still people who think that 1969 technology, went over 400,000 miles, managed to navigate to the moon using computers that were orders of magnitude less powerful than the first iPhone, passing through the immensely hazardous Van Allen radiation belts, which, by the way, NASA cannot figure out how to get through today, somehow landed on the moon, spent a delightful few days planting flags, playing golf, riding around on dune buggies, and then took off, or rather levitated off the lunar surface, only briefly nipping back to pick up the person operating the camera, and returned safely. And not just once, but 7 times. It's a fantasy. The whole thing is a fantasy. Everything you saw supposedly on the moon was in a soundstage using Stanley Kubrick's perfected front projection technology. And I'm not going to spend much time. There's plenty of evidence to show that it was completely faked. It was complete fantasy. Sorry, couldn't resist it. So, despite the Apollo moon hoax, there are people who still believe that man is in space, and we have all sorts of space vehicles and satellites and space stations up there. It's time to have a look at the space shuttle. So, let's take a look at a typical shuttle launch.
T-minus 17 seconds and count. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, start, 2, 1, booster ignition, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond.
Now, I'd like to stop it there for a moment because I'd like to draw your attention to the shuttle's trajectory. Now, as a kid, I often wondered why it was that all rockets and space shuttle launches, they never ever went straight up. They always curved off to one side. Now, I remember being told at the time that it's because the Earth is spinning and the rocket is actually still going straight up, but from our point of view, we're just spinning away from it, so it looks curved. Well, you can't have it both ways. If that's the case, then when we jump into the air, we should land about 1 kilometre to the west. So you can't have it both ways. The quickest way into orbit would be straight up. Going horizontal would be the long way round. Let's continue.
Standing by for the throttle up call from Capcom Steve Pro.
Okay, at this point, the launch profile of the Space Shuttle for my new classified one. We have a remote-controlled, full-size mock-up, basically nothing inside, just an empty shell. That's flown up on remote control, on essentially a big firework. Everything acts as normal. The booster rockets detach as normal. But when we get to the external tank separation, that doesn't actually happen. What actually happens is the tank and the shuttle fall back to Earth, where they ditch in the sea and get destroyed in the process. After the mission's complete, a space shuttle plane takes off from a NASA has an aircraft fitted out to look like the International Space Station's interior. Now take a look at this.
Hello, Katie.
Notice how suddenly, as she starts to wave, she floats out of control.
This is so cool, isn't it? Hey, Katie, I want to
welcome
ask you
aboard
a
the
question.
space station.
This is Leah. Look at this. Wow.
The same thing happens here. As the plane starts its zero-G dive, the people start to spontaneously float upwards. The other problem with this technique is that this aircraft can only simulate zero gravity in 45-second to a minute bursts. So NASA employs many little tricks here to simulate weightlessness. None of their footage is live, it's all pre-recorded and edited, so plenty of scope there to use some of the cinematic tricks that we're used to, like harnesses and wires that are edited out later with CGI. But here we can see one of the tricks they use to maintain continuity between periods of weightlessness. Take a look at this woman's hair. Doesn't it look a bit strange to you? Look how it seems to spring back into place. We're led to believe that this is an effect of weightlessness, that the hair will just sort of float around. But it doesn't quite seem natural, does it? Here's video from the Vomit Comet again. Watch the way this woman's hair flows as she moves. Seems quite obvious now that this is some kind of perm or hairspray, so that between periods of weightlessness we get that visual continuity. Now, there are plenty of examples of these gravitational anomalies, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just wanted to show that all these things that you can see from NASA can be simulated and CGI'd up for your benefit. They don't seem to do any real scientific experiments up there. The effort seems to be just to get you to believe that they're there. That's it. There are also plenty of anomalies when you look at spacewalks. For footage of spacewalks on the exterior of the International Space Station, NASA will freely admit they have a huge swimming pool called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, where they train their astronauts. And within this huge swimming pool, they have a mock-up of the exterior of the International Space Station. I'm going to show you a video from a YouTuber called Jungle Surfer, who's done the best expose of spacewalking anomalies.
Another aspect of the illusion of space travel is spacewalks. These are faked inside a swimming pool. It's a custom-built swimming pool, and that's a great way to fake zero gravity. About 6 months ago, in 2013, a gallon of water leaked into one of their spacesuits in a matter of seconds. NASA doesn't really have a proper explanation for how on earth this could have happened. There shouldn't be water leaking into someone's helmet and a person almost drowning in space. How can you drown in space? They now wear snorkels to make sure that they don't drown in space. How can this be happening? A snorkel in space? There could be some water in the porous plate sublimator. When they were on the moon, they supposedly had about a gallon of water, but that cooling system is supposed to be well away from their head. There really is no sane explanation for why a gallon of water would leak into someone's spacesuit, unless you realize the whole thing is faked inside a swimming pool. In this scene, you can see the Chinese spacewalk, and you can see a bubble coming up from the guy's suit. How do you have a bubble in space? Space is supposed to be a vacuum, not a swimming pool, but it's obviously just a swimming pool filled with water. Obviously, there would be some equipment that they could only fix from the outside, but a lot of these spacewalks, it seems like equipment they easily could have configured to be accessible from the inside of the International Space Station. It seems more like an excuse to get out and show their other space trick, which is the faking of spacewalks in a swimming pool. In this vid, you catch a glimpse of someone wearing a scuba tank. Scuba tanks in space? Snorkels and scuba tanks in space? They act like a spacewalk is just a walk in the park, like there's very little danger involved at all. They're looking through the spacesuits. Oh, here's a spacesuit. We're going to go for a spacewalk. As if there's no danger at all. Like they don't care. They don't care. They don't act like they're in a life-threatening situation, like they could die at any second, even though they can. So you would think to preserve their life they would want to minimize the amount of spacewalking that they did. But there seems to be an abundance of equipment on the outside of the International Space Station that constantly requires repairing, which makes for a good TV spectacle and is inspired by movies like Sandra Bullock's Gravity. And after Gravity came out, they of course had to do another spacewalk to fix some emergency, some piece of equipment that their lives depend on that amazingly they can fix every time. But you know what? Thanks to the genius of the engineers at NASA, they employ snorkels in space now, so that should stop them from drowning.
Finally, I'm going to leave the last word to one of the astronauts themselves, when he made a tiny little slip-up during a question and answer session. Take note of his body language after he makes his mistake.
Hello, my name is Bailey. This question is for Chris. What was high school like for you?
Well, it was the 1980s, so the music was different, the hairstyle was different, the clothes we wore were different than today, but probably in 5 or 10 years it'll be the same. And in school, I was just like you, probably all of you there. I tried my best. I didn't always succeed, didn't always do well, but I put my best effort into school. Math and science were kind of my favorite subject. I didn't really like English and reading too much, but I've since grown out of that, and I enjoy reading now. And I played a lot of sports. And all of that happened in a little town called York, Maine, across the United States from where we're talking to you right now.
Whoops.
Called York, Maine, across the United States from where we're talking to you right now.
Hello, my name is Steve Owen. I'm a teacher here at Riverside Prep. I'd like to ask you about the stress associated with the long periods in the space station. I'd like to ask Karen, what is the training that you get to cope with that stress and related psychological issues?
Well, for psychological issues, actually, when we are selected as astronauts, we go through quite a vigorous psychological screening process. You certainly don't want somebody who comes up here and has a breakdown or is claustrophobic. But also, we have, well, like Chris's background as a Navy SEAL and Luca's background as a test pilot clearly prepare them for high-stress situations. I could also argue that going through the process of getting a PhD can be a high-stress thing as well. And so, generally, when people get to the point where they're applying for this job, they've been through several things in their life that are high stress and have proven that they can handle.
Humans in space? I'm not even sure there is such a thing as space anymore. So, could the Earth really be flat? Most people, when they think of a flat Earth, immediately think, what happens when you get to the edge? Well, the flat Earth model is a flat circular disk with a north magnetic pole in the centre, and all the continents are laid out around it. On the edge of this disk is a wall of ice, and we call it Antarctica. There is no South Pole. That's why you can't fall off the flat Earth. The wall of ice keeps the oceans in and stops you from reaching the edge. Strangely enough, the only other place that this model is used is in the United Nations logo. Looks like they know something that we don't. As you can see on the UN logo, the flat Earth map is overlaid with a grid. And that grid divides the Earth into 33 sections. And also, there's no Antarctica on this map. It's almost as if that grid were like bars, like a cell, locking us away from Antarctica, which is precisely what they're doing. The United Nations countries are all signatories to the Antarctica Treaty, which basically bans anybody from going to Antarctica. And if there's any absolute proof of either the globe Earth or the flat one, then I believe the answers would be in Antarctica. But before we examine Antarctica, I'd like to take a look at flights in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, this information came to me through Mark Sargent and his Flat Earth Clues. A lot of people say that Mark is a shill. I communicated with him over email. He seemed like a decent bloke. So I'm not going to say he's a shill. He has his ideas, his views, his perspectives, as I have mine, and everybody else has theirs. So I'm not going to say he's a shill. But nonetheless, his Flat Earth Clues were very well done, and I got a lot out of them. So thank you, Mark. The crux of this issue is the lack of direct flights in the Southern Hemisphere. I took a look at some of these flights and particularly focused on flights from Cape Town to Auckland, New Zealand. Generally, flights in the Southern Hemisphere tend to be indirect, with one or more connections and lengthy layovers. Such is the case with this one from Cape Town to Auckland. This flight came out around about 37 hours with a connecting flight in Dubai. Now if you look on a map, Cape Town to Auckland is a straight shot across the Indian Ocean, 7,310 miles. That should take about 12 hours. But in this case, we're taking thousands of miles north to Dubai, then back down south to Melbourne, and then across to Auckland. It doesn't make any sense. Until, that is, you look at it on the Flat Earth model. Now you can see it's a straight line from Cape Town to Dubai to Melbourne, and the distance is more like 16,000 miles. So the total journey time of 37 hours is there to hide the fact that your actual flight time is 26 hours rather than 11 or 12. Now, I did find one direct flight operated by Qantas, but who knows? The flight was 14 hours long, but does that flight actually exist? I don't know. Short of booking that flight and flying it, I wouldn't know. But it strikes me that you could advertise such a flight, price it beyond the reach of most people, and cancel it for anybody who does take it. But that's just speculation. Now, the GPS system would obviously show up any anomalies in the flight plan, but it seems they've found a very simple way of getting around that problem, and that is switching off GPS tracking for all flights in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, this is an image from Flight Tracker, and you can see straight off that in the Northern Hemisphere you'll see planes over the ocean, but there are none in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, I spent some time looking at it on flighttracker.com, and I actually verified this information, but I couldn't capture the data on my computer. So here's a video of planes disappearing and reappearing off the tracking systems.
So hey guys, I'm on planefinder.net. I'm tracking airplanes in the Southern Hemisphere, trying to do some research to verify or debunk this flat Earth guy. And what he said is that airplanes disappear in the South Atlantic near the, in the Southern Hemisphere when they fly over oceans. And it's true. I was tracking a British Airways flight from Buenos Aires to London. And I was tracking, and then it disappeared. And then I clicked on this plane right here, Qatar. See how the flight path, like when you click on the plane, the flight path appears or disappears, right? So I clicked on this plane looking for my British Airways flight, and I found this flight, and look, see how the flight path just starts in the middle of nowhere right here? This flight path starts in the middle of nowhere. That's because what they do with flights in the Southern Hemisphere is they disappear them. They turn off the GPS over the ocean, and then they reappear the flights about an hour before landing. And that's exactly what the Flat Earth guy said they do. And that's exactly what they're doing. Right, this guy's going to Rome. Okay. So this is a pretty good flight to track because he's going all the way to Europe. So I just clicked on this flight, same thing. This guy, we should have saw him before when we were tracking the other plane and when we were tracking this plane that's heading to Rome. But this guy, when we were tracking the plane headed to Rome, he wasn't even on the map. He's coming from Abu Dhabi. It's in the Middle East. He's been in the air for what, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours? He's been in the air for 7,000 miles, and we're just picking him up right here. We're just picking him up in the middle of nowhere. Look. They disappeared the flight over the entire ocean, and they're reappearing it for landing about an hour before landing. Think about it. He's got 500 miles to go. It's about an hour before landing, just like the Flat Earth guy said. I mean, take a look at what this guy's flight path should look like on a Flat Earth model. This stuff's crazy. You have to look into this for yourselves. Don't pretend like you know everything, because you only know what you've been taught, and we know that the stuff we've been taught was a bunch of bullshit. So we need to question everything. Question everything, but don't believe everything. Question everything. There's a big difference.
Now, I know a lot of this evidence seems circumstantial, but there are many flights in the Southern Hemisphere that have stopovers in seemingly nonsensical places that only make sense on a flat Earth. Santiago, Chile to Auckland, for instance, stops over in Los Angeles. Nonsensical on a globe makes perfect sense on a flat Earth. And the only way to verify these flight paths just happens to be switched off for all Southern Hemisphere flights. Circumstantial, I'll grant you, but compelling nonetheless. So let's take a close look at Antarctica. The first thing you'd encounter when you reached Antarctica would be a 200-foot wall of ice, followed by 300 miles of Antarctic desert. No life, no vegetation, and temperatures that drop to minus 100 degrees centigrade. And if you manage to survive that, then you encounter a mountain range 2 miles high. Those mountains are called the Rockefeller Mountains, and at the top is the Rockefeller Plateau. Interesting. And beyond that, nobody knows what's there. Apart from maybe one man, Richard E. Byrd. Admiral Byrd led 3 expeditions down to Antarctica. Now, the last 2 weren't just expeditions, they were military operations. Operation High Jump and Operation Deep Freeze. And here's Admiral Byrd explaining what he found down there.
Admiral Byrd, our guest tonight, is not only our greatest living explorer, but he's been an inspiration to countless Americans. Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this Earth?
Yes, there is. But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole on the other side of the South Pole from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
That's a tremendous
So
challenge.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Why this interest in the bottom of the world? Nobody living down there, is there?
It happens to be an untouched reservoir of natural resources.
What are they? What are the natural resources there?
Well, we've found enough of coal within 180 miles of the South Pole in a great ridge of mountains. It's not covered with snow, enough to supply the whole world for quite a while.
Well,
that's the coal. Now, there's evidence of many other minerals. We are pretty sure there's oil. Now, that coal shows the bottom of the world. Now, by far the coldest spot in the world. Where that coal is gets 100 below zero in the winter.
Well,
it was once tropical. So we think there's oil there, and there's evidence, probably uranium there. As I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation. So I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year.
Immediately after Admiral Byrd's last expedition, the Antarctic Treaty was signed and nobody was allowed to go there. Bearing in mind all the mineral resources, unlimited coal, unlimited oil, uranium, and an entire continent the size of North America lying unexplored. Now, we're talking about countries who burn down rainforests without batting an eyelid, or put up drilling rigs at the merest sniff of oil, or destroy pristine countryside to build fracking wells. Do you think for one moment any of these countries or corporations will leave all that untapped wealth unexploited? Something doesn't ring true. Now, I don't know for sure that we live on a flat earth, but I do know that we're not clinging onto the surface of a ball. And now let's look at the how and why. How have they managed to pull this off? Well, indoctrination since childhood. There's pretty much a globe in every classroom, and it's just a given that the world is a sphere. Even our language reflects it. Global finance and around the globe. And when we're taught things in childhood and everything we look at supports that view, then we rarely go back and re-examine it. But far and away the main basis of our belief is the supposed history of our scientific endeavour. What most people don't realise is that all the characters in this story are all actors in the same club. As George Carlin put it, it's a big club and you're not in it. Ptolemy, who first put forward the heliocentric model, was acknowledged as the first Mason. Copernicus was a Jesuit priest. Sir Isaac Newton was a Freemason. All the astronauts are Freemasons. So you can see how this lie could work if all these celebrated people are telling the same story. Another way we're programmed is by centralized and complete control over space information and access to space. That control is held by the space agencies around the world, NASA and RASA and the European Space Agency. It turns out that NASA is essentially composed of Nazis. Look up Operation Paperclip. NASA was actually formed from Nazi scientists transplanted to America after the war. I need not remind most people that the Nazi approach to propaganda is if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. And finally, we've had decades of programming through entertainment media, over 100 years of science fiction books and stories and television programs and films. I must admit to being a science fiction fan myself. I grew up watching Star Trek, Star Wars, Babylon 5, Battlestar Galactica, watching films like 2001, 2010. I truly believed that our future lay in space. I saw an exciting future for mankind, moon bases, Mars bases, interstellar travel. But now I sincerely doubt there is any such thing as space. It turns out that the Bible had a very clear conception of what the Earth and the universe looks like. And that matches the flat Earth model more than it does the globe. And that only leaves why. Why have they done this? What's the point of this grand deception? I think Eric Dubay explains it best.
Right. Yeah, I mean, our eyes and experience tell us the Earth is flat and motionless, and everything in the sky revolves around us. But when we cease to believe our own eyes and experience, we have to prostrate ourselves at the feet of these very pseudoscientists who are blinding us, treat them as experts, astronomical priests who have special knowledge only they can access, like the Hubble telescope. So by brainwashing us of something so gigantic and fundamental, it actually makes every other kind of lesser indoctrination a piece of cake. Earth being the flat, fixed center of the universe around which everything in the heavens revolves gives a special importance and significance not only to Earth, but to us humans, the most intelligent among the intelligent designers' designs. By turning Earth into a spinning ball thrown around the sun and shot through infinite space from a godless Big Bang, they turn humanity into a random, meaningless, purposeless accident of a blind, dumb universe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like trauma-based mind control, beating the divinity out of us with their mental manipulations. People are always asking, why do they do this? Other than the obvious profit margin motive, NASA being the biggest black budget black hole in existence, sucking in over $30 billion taxpayer money for the fake moon landings alone. Nowadays, hundreds of billions of dollars, and not just NASA, but RASA and all the other fake space organizations around the world, giving CGI images for hundreds of billions of dollars. So this modern atheist Big Bang heliocentric globe Earth chance evolution paradigm spiritually controls humanity by removing God or any sort of intelligent design and replaces purposeful divine creation with haphazard random cosmic coincidence. And so by removing Earth from the motionless center of the universe, these Masons have moved us physically and metaphysically from a place of supreme importance to one of complete nihilistic indifference. If the Earth is the center of the universe, then the ideas of God, creation, and a purpose for human existence are resplendent. But if the Earth is just one of billions of planets revolving around billions of stars and billions of galaxies, then the ideas of God, creation, and a specific purpose for Earth and human existence become highly implausible. So by surreptitiously indoctrinating us into their scientific materialist sun worship, not only do we lose faith in anything beyond the material, we gain absolute faith in materiality, superficiality, status, selfishness, hedonism, and consumerism. If there's no God and everyone's just an accident, then all that really matters is me, me, me. So they've turned Madonna, the mother of God, into the material girl living in a material world. Their rich, powerful corporations with their slick sun cult logos sell us idols to worship, slowly taking over the world while we tacitly believe their science, vote for their politicians, buy their products, listen to their music, watch their movies, all sacrificing our souls at the altar of materialism. It's a big deception. I'd say it's the biggest cover-up and conspiracy in history. We've been completely deluded for 500 years.
So there you have it. There are a great many other points I could have raised, and I've barely scratched the surface. But if any of these points are true, then we have to abandon the model we've accepted thus far. Now, I don't know for sure that the Earth is flat, but I've seen enough evidence to make me strongly feel that that is the case. And moreover, my spidey sense, my intuition, tells me that this is true. I don't know what's beyond Antarctica. It could be a dome. It could be an infinite flat plane. It could even be just more Earth. More Earth than we realise, just as Admiral Byrd found. There are many who think that ultimately this is unimportant and just a distraction. But I see this as one of the most important revelations we could ever have. If this is the case, if this flat Earth is our universe, then it elevates man and this Earth to supreme importance, where every life, human or otherwise, is significant and sacred. And when we all realise that, then the world, the universe, changes. So I'd like to finish this the same way as Mark Sargent does. Do your own research and feel free to contact me. I'm Dave at allegedlydave.com.